So these are the names. The Chair Vikasa, Chris, and back to you. These are the three I have. Are there any others? So sorry, you had your hand up. So apologies.
I just had a piggyback comment.
piggyback.
What she said.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Piggyback, and then Chair, and then you.
Mine will be so quick. I just want to say there's a lack of education of the actual podcast host. Before we get to recourse, I think education on what's ethical, what is right to say. So it's just to add on that code of conduct. Before we get to code of conduct, like what are the basics of what to say and what not to say?
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I think for me, it starts with the notion of saying why were regulators established. So if there was an intention just to put together a framework where we put rules, I would look at podcasts and say, if you are living in a democratic country, when anyone who's licensed, I think politically the first thing that people talk about is localization. So if podcast, amongst many other things that is expected to deliver, talks to the local environment, issues that are affecting us as citizens, promoting our national heritage through language, so that there's that visibility of diversity, because as and when you consume, you need to protect your own sovereignty, because ultimately, as a country, you cannot allow dominance of somebody outside your environment. So if the intention then is to say, let's put together a framework, for me, it's just a framework just to ensure that we protect our sovereignty as a country through these various medium platforms. And lastly, I think we spoke about the rules, because if the rules are not clearly defined, I mean, innovators, they know. I mean, even if you're in research, the standards that you follow. You don't just do things. So it's going to be important that should we decide for regulation, compliance, code of conduct, it should be clearly defined rules, because as it stands right now, to avoid litigation, sometimes, I'm not a legal person, but as I said, as an engineer, we normally put things very clear, there's a 0 and 1. So it's going to be important that what is written in any framework must be very clearly identified. Somebody should be able to can interpret that in all languages. I think that's another issue, because we were not just looking at English, because all the podcasters I know, there's one here, Spade, you go Limpopo, but we need to make sure that all languages are, and even for the entire society. Thanks.
Thank you. So I sort of just want to perhaps touch on two things. The first one is to align myself with the previous speaker to say that yes, there needs to be a set of rules, but I think what we shouldn't do is to have it just for podcasters. We're talking about digital content creators as a whole. I'm assuming the context of this conversation. So I think that there needs to be the set of rules, and these rules then could be adjudicated by all the other bodies that are represented in this room. It was quite encouraging to hear from the Film and Publications Board the extent to which they are able to then step in. So that was the one thing that I wanted to say. And then just to go back to your question when you asked us, why are we here? We all value the freedom of expression. More so, I think all of us who are in the media space. But I think what's happened now is that people have forgot that right to freedom of expression comes with a responsibility. And that's where we've sort of lost our way. Or some of the digital content creators have lost their way. And then another thing that I am hoping that we can also perhaps touch on is the issue of intellectual property, because what we are finding is that digital content creators are taking everybody's work and passing it off on its own and as their own, and there is no perhaps mechanism in place or a place where we can go and complain, and that is a big factor for me.
Thank you. If you read the title of the white paper, it says audio and audio-visual media services and online safety. The audio was specific. In the first iterations, there was no audio. So the audio we added because we had seen the emergence of podcasts and audio on, we call them audio on demand services in a way. Because remember, the previous regime was regulating your traditional radio. So with the emergence of like your audio on demand or podcasts, and you needed to create a framework around that one. And I think the approach there also, when we were asking around the issue that had arisen around the ombudsperson to say with the online safety issues, you require quick turnaround. And we had acknowledged that when we were doing the broadcasting regulatory review at the CAS around 2010, one of the concerns was that it's very expensive for people to complain and whatever. How do we reduce the cost for the public? So with this one of the ombuds, I think the issue is to also reduce the cost and sort of look at dispute resolution mechanisms that are very fast, and because it matters a lot in terms of time frames, that if you are something that wrong is done, you might lose elections or something like that, or something bad might happen. So I think that was the purpose of trying to cater for that. So I thought I should just bring that into context in relation to the white paper. But the ombuds is around quick turnarounds in terms of complaints and ensuring that the public at a certain point does not pay because the other people have lots and lots of cash they can frustrate the resolution. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Oscar, go ahead.
Yeah. While I'm mindful about the complaints handling and the capacity and all of that, now as a broadcaster, I'm also more worried about the freedom of expression. Uh, with what I've heard as well earlier on from the platforms, it was even mentioned that content is taken down, and that content is taken down, and without any complaint handling mechanism. And with us coming from where we're coming from the previous regime, well, we call that censorship. Content shouldn't be taken down before there is a procedure of complaints handling. So I'm very much worried that we are more concerned about the other rights, which is very valid, human rights and all of that, but we seem to be least concerned about freedom of expression, and even the Constitutional Court has made a ruling about even offensive material, that it is actually within the right to freedom of expression. And when you're looking at platforms, they usually just look at offensive words, and that is just triggered, and then content may be just taken down because there's no, it doesn't matter what the context is, as in the normal complaints handling they will look at. Meanwhile, I understand that there is an issue of capacity, but the freedom of expression, as it has been constantly said, it is the cornerstone of our democracy, and there needs to be a balance with all of this. So we cannot be looking at podcasters that, okay, they're saying they're doing all of these sort of things. We need to regulate them in order for to ensure that all these other rights are not violated, but we should also be very much concerned about the freedom of expression, that in so doing, even the code of conduct or whatever framework or regulatory framework we come with, there is a balance, having in mind that freedom of expression is that important as well.
Thanks, Oscar. Before I come to Philly, Tawana, do you want to just respond to that? Around the takedown before it's put on platforms.
Thank you. When it comes to the proactive removal of content, specifically to address the issue raised by Oscar, we remove content that is expressly in violation with our community guidelines. And as we had also presented earlier on, our community guidelines, and I'll speak specifically within the South Africa context, are premised on our local laws or South Africa's local laws. We take them into consideration. So the Constitution, Section 16.2, really outlines what is not protected speech. And that's further elaborated in other pieces of legislation, including the Film and Publications Act as amended, including the Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, including, but to mention the last one, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. So when it comes to that proactive removal of content, it's content that we know categorically is actually not only harmful content in violation of our community guidelines, but is actually illegal, if I can use that term. In relation to any other content that is then removed by the platform, we also do have an appeals process. So, as the owner of that content or the person who uploaded it, if you think that the moderation decision was wrong, you are welcome to actually appeal that decision in itself. And it's again to ensure that we strike that balance, because nobody can say specifically where the point is where you are able to say you've perfectly achieved the balance between freedom of expression and prevention of harm on the one end. And that's why then the appeal mechanism also helps to ensure that we are able to assess whether or not that particular decision or that particular piece of content was appropriately moderated.
Thanks, Tawana. I noted Philly's hand. I've noted your hand as well. And then your hand. Go ahead, Philly.
I just want to take a step back. Do we see podcasters or digital content creators as an industry or as a sector? That question is very important because before you arrive at the framework, you need to understand who are you regulating, what kind of sector is this. For me, it is very important. And the question that I'm raising is, it's very easy. It's very easy to deal with a very organized environment. And it is important that I think parliamentarians and those of us who are here, because I think we're speaking to us as people that actually have long been in the field and who knows what is it. But there are people out there that have potential, as it was said, we see this as an economic opportunity. Now, it means it needs to be organized. If it's seen that way, I think language such as SMEs and so on was used. So it means it needs to be organized in the sense that they should be able to now try to shape whatever regulatory framework that comes. But I think the second level is if you want to go that route, I've seen there's a pushback on the concept of regulation, but I think what was unfortunate is regulation doesn't work one way. The same podcasters need to be protected through regulation. It's not just about, there's something offensive or anyway. Look, the established broadcasters, their pockets are safe because there's a regulatory mechanism that is put in place. But these guys are so vulnerable that whoever has money in their pocket can shut them down by just taking them to court. They don't have any other alternative immunization. But the big organized industries have that. So it is very important that an awareness around regulation must be seen from also being from a protectionist point of view from their side. And also for the growth of their industry. I think I found that missing earlier on because I think we took a very age-old approach of saying regulation is inhibitive. But there's light touch regulation. I don't think anybody really wants to stifle them. We have seen them, they've added to diversity of views in terms of content. They have created economic opportunity. And once they're organized, and then there's a third level. The third level is economic incentive that comes out of this. Now these guys will need resources. Then we can have a regulated framework that actually assists them to access the resources, like community radio as it is. They can grow to that level where now resources can be put in place to say, if you are a podcaster or a digital content creator, this is where you can access resources. This is how you can build yourself into an establishment that can be recognized. So, and that cannot happen in a vacuum. It means you need to have certain, regulations or laws that assist the growth of the affairs. So I'm trying to say it mustn't be looked at in one way to say somebody wants to quell you down, wants just to get rid of you because they don't like you or they don't want you to grow. I think is the how, what kind of regulation should be there that is protective and enhancing growth of the industry. I just felt that was missing in the earlier discussion, especially that they're so vulnerable. I mean, we've seen how people have been taken to the cleaners. It's not nice. A young chap or person in the township sees this opportunity. It doesn't know. It doesn't have awareness. Somebody spoke about awareness. It starts on the wrong foot. The whole thing gets to be shut down immediately. So those are the risks because of lack of awareness and organization.
Thanks, Philip. That's really helpful. And I think it would be good. We don't have any of the podcast, the field people here now, not yet. On the other side, all right. So we're going to get a comment there. We're going to come back there. But I think there, I think the the point that Philly's raised around enabling provisions of both policy and regulation is vital. And I think thank you for turning that around in terms of how we approach this. And it would be nice if there are any podcasters here to let's start talking about those economic drivers. Because one of the key issues, just the way we understand it simplistically, is if you wanting to get advertisers, marketers behind your podcast and you want them to support you, they need to have trust in your product. And so the whole thing about if I trust your product in our broadcasting space, your signatories to codes of conduct, people know what you stand for. There's trust in that product, in that system. And advertisers will hopefully then continue to support you. If you're working in an environment that's not as organized, where there are no codes of conduct that everyone signed up to, whether they're pledges, codes of conduct, whatever they may be, your ability to then attract the kind of advertisers, the kind of promotion you want, really is diminished. So thanks for that reminder. I think it's important. I did have a hand there, and then a hand there, and then a hand this side. Please go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
I think I just wanted to react to the issue around censorship. Because I think in terms of the current framework, there is good framework and of access to information, which offer from a regulator's perspective, looking into how the whole takedown process takes place for regulators that adapt that particular stance. I think what is important, and it has been spoken to before, is how are we able to then close the enforcement gaps with the existing legislation, because we all worked through different mediums in terms of our mandates and legislative focus. How are we then able to harmonize that to speak to exactly what the chair said in terms of also ensuring digital sovereignty for South Africa vis-a-vis what we have as a standard set by the platforms? Thanks.
Thank you. That's really important in terms of standard setting and who's setting them. Thank you. And then, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 with another one, and then Norman. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much. What I'm hearing is that we don't look at what is the root cause in terms of the problem that we have now. Because the root cause is that podcast sector is easy to entry. Anyone at this moment has a phone, and in her bedroom, he can just think to talk about any topic without following the rules. Yes, rules are there. The constitution is there. There is a online safety charter on human rights, but how many podcasters take time to understand those rules and follow them? Because what they're chasing for the like, and someone said they're chasing for the money. I think it's you, Oscar, said that, and they compromise what is right, and they don't care whether they're violating or they're riding on someone else's right. The issue, I will support the issue of, or the proposal say maybe we need a central organization that maybe will deal holistically with the issue of educational. And I think it's been raised before, but I feel like it should be started at the root cause where we educate from school about the right, how to use your right in terms of freedom of speech, section 16. And if we have that, I think we'll combat the issue of harmful content. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going back up here and here. Chris, did you have your hand up? And Sasha, yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to actually come in much earlier just to support the point around broadening what we're looking at to broader content creation rather than just podcasts. And I think it goes back to the issue of categories and tiers that was discussed earlier. To say what exactly are we talking about? Are we looking at digital content creation and saying podcast is one of the categories, influencers? So I think we need to think about those different categories. But I think the other element is thinking, because if you look at podcast, it originates or it was inspired, I think, maybe the podcasters can correct me. I think the inspiration came from radio, having conversations and speaking to people. So I believe that there needs to be some sort of information sharing mechanisms between existing media and podcasters. Patissa earlier on, she mentioned that the press council trains some of these podcasters. I believe that can happen outside of the press council. We've got the SABC that's been in the industry for years. We complain about, issues of accuracy of information, lack of fact checking, and these are things that the industry, the media industry really understands. So I believe that we need to also create those information sharing and learning mechanisms between, broader content creators and media entities.
Thank you. Those are really helpful.
To also move away from the notion as if we are talking about policing, and I think in whatever we recommend, we need to move from the standpoint of rights, which is the rights we're talking about, the freedom of expression. And after that, we're talking about the responsibility to say, as a publisher, as a content creator, you've got a particular responsibility. You don't have to wait for complaints. You've got a particular responsibility not to publish hate speech, sexist, and racist speech. And after that, we spoke about the acknowledgement of public recourse and remedial action for the public. And lastly, regulate. So it mustn't be regulate as in policing and then you move to the other thing. So which means you have to acknowledge the fact that we are regulation, which obviously emphasis on self-regulation. Thanks.
Thanks, that's great. We've got you'll do the summary for us. Rights, responsibility, recourse, and regulate. So we've got those as key recommendations. That's wonderful. Thank you. Chris, and then Dimakatso Sasha.
You spoke earlier, a lot of the podcasters, what they are wanting to do is help monetize what they do. So if one talks about digital content creators, what we did with influencers as a whole is influencers sign up to a code of conduct, which is being drafted by themselves and the advertising agencies that do that, because advertising agencies to get certainty in what they want to do, to put money behind various products, want that kind of certainty in terms of behavior, in terms of recourse, and in terms of everything else. So influencer code of conduct, which then puts them under a self-regulatory framework, which I think is important from a growth of the industry perspective, that podcasters or digital content creators, because I think that's the broader term that we want to use here, have that element where they are under a self-regulatory framework, which they all sign up to, which gives advertisers certainty to say, if I'm as a AB InBev are going to be sponsoring a particular product or show, that we know that we have certainty in terms of the metrics that are used, the measurements that are used, and then how it then falls out to, if there's an issue, we can go to a particular body, and there is this self-regulatory mechanism in place. I think that works for all the other broadcasters, the press council, the influencers, and it's a matter of replicating that to help the industry grow, because it is a growth mechanism. Yes, in some instances we say it's a person with a phone in a room, but nobody necessarily listens to that person in a phone in a room unless that content goes viral. It takes a long time for podcasters to grow to get to that base level. But if we are working together with the content creators in helping them understand that what drives revenue creation for them is that certainty, then we're working in the same space, because we're working for the growth and the benefit of everybody, both from their commercial aspect as well as protecting the consumers from the harmful side effects of it.
Thanks, Chris. I know Norman behind me from the FPB, his hand has been up and he is giving me the evil eye, so I'm going to let him talk first. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I think we need to look at definitions, layers, safety, and compliance. And the question will then be, when we talk about the podcast, what is it that it is delivering? Is delivering information? Is delivering education? Is delivering entertainment? Whether others are not happy with what is being provided is something else. So when you look at those three broad areas, those are the areas that are covered by the objectives of broadcasting. Broadcasting is there to inform, educate, and entertain. Whether you do that through the airwaves or whether you do that through internet or whether you deliver that with a new platform that will appear tomorrow that no one knows, which is not internet, it doesn't change the objective. That the objective remain to inform, to educate, and to entertain. So if we accept that broadcasting is evolving from the manner in which it was transmitted with the advent of internet, we should also then accept that the manner in which we need to look at broadcasting needs to change. If broadcasting is under the auspices of ICASA, whether that information that is being distributed to inform, educate, or entertain is transmitted through airwaves or any other media, it doesn't change that it is still broadcasting. There might be different layers of broadcasting as to how do we then classify certain information. Which information would need licensing, which information would need a registration. So, the issues relating to safety and the issue relating to compliance would also need to then follow that logic to then say, if the purpose is to inform, entertain, and educate, safety measures that ought to apply in broadcasting, if they are not sufficient for purposes of internet, they will also need to evolve and to change and to adapt. But it doesn't change that the broad three principles are still the same. If we accept that there will be certain content that is distributed to inform, entertain, and educate, which would not fall within the auspices of ICASA, the legislation, which is FPB, has already given us some guidance to then say, if certain information falls within the broadcaster who is regulated by ICASA, there will be a need to exempt that content from classification. So, whether that content is transmitted via airwave or internet or any other new platform that will come tomorrow, to the extent that that entity is not within the jurisdiction of ICASA, the consideration that we need to look at is that should that then be subject to the jurisdiction of the FPB? In the similar manner that we then distinguish the content that is subject to ICASA and the content that is subject to the FPB. And the only exception is not only...
You're going to have to wind down your point, please, because I think this is a very controversial point, yes. And I think people have varying views around it.
And I have raised it intentionally so that we can have a frank discussion about it. Thank you.
Good. So, right at the back with the blue jacket, I did note your hand, but okay, I'm going to go there. Is there someone behind me? So I'm going to go to Mosh first, and then Sashin was waiting, and then William. You. Thanks.
Look, I just want to disagree with the gentleman over there to say, look, the issue about confining and narrowing everything to inform, educate, and entertain, that was in 1922, before any platforms allowed people, because it was a narrow one way to say, I'm going to inform you, I'm going to entertain you, I'm going to educate you. It's 2024, where it's no longer one way. So we need to be careful in terms of not narrowing our discussion in that sense. Thanks.
Thank you. As we head off to 2026, do you want to make a quick point? But it has to be very quick because William's waiting, and then go ahead.
Say, if you look at the definition of podcast. A podcast. If you look at the definition of the podcast and where it comes from until now, you will understand that we started with an iPod on an iPhone, and from there, you can hear. Maybe that's this one. Check 1 2 1 2. You hear me now? Just to check where the word podcast come from. We started with iPad, then other podcasters they saw that as an opportunity to
yeah, maybe that's yeah.
This one is
communications department.
Yeah, just to say, in terms of the definition, broadcasting and podcast is not the same. Looking at the history where the podcast coming from, it started with the iPad and then it evolved over time, where people realized the opportunity that, oh, okay, it's not only voice, now we can even put videos on that. Even currently, I don't know how many podcasters, but because podcasters are not live, like a podcast, like they said, that was the one way, whereas the podcast is on demand. Like you can pause, you can stop. If maybe I don't like, maybe I'm looking at the interview, I don't like the other interview, I can just skip and just listen to another interview, or maybe in the because topic in this category in one series of podcasts. So we cannot define it in that way. It's a different genre. As I said before, to say anyone can record, like in the bedroom or even now, a podcast about maybe this session and maybe educating people. And maybe I just do that one video. So how, for example, ICASA will regulate that? So it's going to be difficult for ICASA to come up with a regulation. But in terms of issue of principality, I think that we can try maybe using the current code, maybe transferring it maybe to the social media to say maybe they must apply this code also to to look at Section 16, what it's saying, and looking also at the limitation in terms of Section 36. Thank you.
Thanks. Dimitri, I'm not sure where he is. But just to say that this is the first time we've gathered in this shape and form with these stakeholders. It is but the first conversation we're having. There's going to have to be a range of different conversations that have to be had. And this is the first bite, okay? So I think we are sharing our immediate thoughts, our views. We've heard the wonderful presenters earlier today are giving us some deep dive in terms of how they are currently applying moderation tools, how they're dealing with content, a whole host of things. But let's see this as a first conversation, and many will have to follow. And when we take forward recommendations later, when we've got to do the feedback, we will do the feedback in that kind of overview manner. We cannot drill into specifics. And it would be great if we had a few general recommendations. So can you already start thinking about that in terms of the general recommendations we'd like to make, so that out of this, there's some concrete next steps. So if you could just now start turning your focus and attention to what it is we would like to share in the plenary session and the recommendations we'd like to make to the honourable MPs. Go ahead, William.
Thanks. Point taken, so I won't make the advanced argument very strongly. We work very well with our friends at the Film Publication Board, but under no circumstances can we say in this hallowed house of democratic rule that the FPB can be that regulator. The simple reason that they're not independent. That said, I think as a general recommendation, it's critical that we look at AI issues that are going to impact this, because otherwise, in a year's time, there's going to be a waterfall of a revolution around AI that we're not even going to have thought about. Thanks. Over.
Thanks, William. Right at the back, go ahead. And then Sashin, I feel terrible. Sashin's been behind me, and I'm not sure if one of the colleagues or actual podcasters would like to contribute, because you are the star of today's conversation. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. I just have a couple of thoughts, because it's something that's bounced around a few times about self-regulation. So, separate from the question of independence, there's a sort of self-regulation question as one of the solutions here. And I think self-regulation absolutely has its place, but it works best in situations where we're all good corporate citizens. And I think anybody who's participating in a process like this is more likely to be involved in these voluntary bodies, to sign up to these codes and to comply with them, or certainly if you're Meta, to have a code of conduct that complies with our constitutional values. What we're worried about, and I think one of the great things about the internet, but also one of the risks of the internet, is that it doesn't take a lot of power or money or influence to get a very large audience and have lots of influence yourself. And what we're worried about is the Wild West outside of the kinds of people or entities or companies or podcasters or whatever it might be, who would be willing to voluntarily submit to self-regulation or participate in these processes. And that might be a minority, but it's the kind of minority of actors which are likely to cause the bulk of the harms in this in relation to content moderation, in relation to hate speech, in relation to violence. So while, and that's not to say we need to replace self-regulation. Self-regulation, there's lots of examples in regulation, in law, where we have standards that industries impose on themselves, and we have a minimum basic standard that may not be as high a standard as those self-regulatory bodies, but nonetheless make sure that people who would not otherwise participate are still held to a standard that achieves the goals that we want to achieve. So I want to just stress that self-regulation shouldn't be a replacement for regulation of these issues, and they certainly can live together in a good framework going forward. Thank you.
Interesting, and I think they're self-regulators who will tell you how effective self-regulation has been, and I think that's something we need to also consider and unpack a little bit more. Sashin, you're on, and then I'll come back to Tina, and then Dimakatso.
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, from my side, I think it's going to be difficult, regulation-wise, legal-wise, to really, and it's something that's going to happen going forward as well with different technologies, to actually define and sort of from the outside of the circle in see where this starts and where it stops, because pace of technology is just seems to be increasing, and it was a point made in Parliament, but I'm sure in a few years there'll be a new version of podcasts or something that no one's foreseen of, and we can't really draft the legislation too narrowly because who knows what's going to be the next thing. Everyone says AI now, but in 7 years' time or 5 years' time, it could be something completely new that's in the spotlight. It's very hard to predict, and companies change and grow, and who knows what the next big thing is. If we did, people would be doing it now.
Thanks. And good policymakers and regulators always draft and craft very broad statements to capture where the future's going and how technology shifts. Tina, please go ahead.
I didn't actually have my hand up. I just had a concerned look on my face. But I think many of us are saying the same thing, and it's probably given time, a useful time to start moving into the concrete regulation. So 100% self-regulation isn't the only option or one option. We can have many parallel options. I've just taken a look at the South African Podcasters Guild pledge, and that's quite an interesting starting point. I think, I don't know if anyone from that entity is here, but it is a useful starting point, but a lot more could be done with it. And that is potentially one of the ways where we want to better self-regulate if we want to stick with this industry. But I also agree with moving it beyond just podcasters and having digital content creators. So then if we have this self-regulatory body, that's fantastic. And industry should self-regulate. There's an absolute beauty in that. It's really special. But there do need to be other mechanisms in place where there are bigger harms that play bigger rights violations. And that's where the points around independence come in. So quite simply, I do think those who want to be bound by the Press Council, those types of podcasters or content creators who do believe that they are disseminating any form of news media should easily be able to access entities like the Press Council. And the Press Council has already made that very clear today, that is an avenue worth exploring. We then have the Guild. I think the Guild should potentially tighten up this wording. I'd welcome a chat with them about it. There's some very interesting points to flesh out there. And then I think alongside these self-regulatory mechanisms in parallel, following whatever happens with the white paper, is then moving to the firmer form of legislation and what that looks like and forecasting. So I think all of these things can happen in parallel, and they probably should start happening relatively soon because of the plethora of harms we are faced with. But we must just simply get going. And the longer it's important and we must figure it out. But if we keep talking about it, AI is going to have come and gone and we still don't have any laws in place. And that's also not particularly helpful.
Absolutely. So we're going to, if you would like to, as the only podcaster in the room, if you'd like to share anything, and then I'll come to Demakatso.
Good afternoon, everyone. Baladama from Podcast and Chill Network. I've seen the debate being largely about self-regulation. I think as an organization, we definitely support it, right? So one of the other hats that I wear is that I look after the commercial interest through another entity of all the biggest platforms in the country. So we are in support of self-regulation. I think it's important to just understand who's going to be a part of that. I've been leading it with Chris Bahrain, from the IAB, just trying to see whether we could create some kind of entity and a board that will then sort of be the next stage gate after the platforms have sort of, reviewed. And then if there's something that does slip through the cracks, then we would be that entity that then maybe intervenes before it goes into any higher authority. So that's the idea. I think we support it. It's got its pros and cons, I think, as long as it doesn't stifle creativity in any way. Because at the end of the day, I think there was mention around how platforms and technology is growing at an accelerated rate. So my perspective is in the next 5 years, you're going to have a podcast that doesn't have a human being in front of it, right? It's going to be an AI body and someone who's been created, and there's going to be an individual, we don't even know who that person is, who's making these guys talk. How do you regulate them? I suppose the answer would be we can't, right? So again, what I foresee happening is that regulation would probably be of all the let's call it top 10 maybe podcasts in the country, as opposed to being a blanket approach for everyone, because anyone can, there's someone live right now in Soweto who's broadcasting what's happening in Soweto. How do we regulate what that person says? Right? So it is fairly difficult, but I think there's a different level of accountability that sits with the top 10 or top 20 biggest in the country. But also there's not that many, because if I had to ask you how many platforms in this country are close to 2 million subscribers, or have more than 3 million unique viewers? One. How many have more than 2 million unique viewers? One. How many have more than 500,000 unique viewers? One. The rest are typically falling below 500,000, which is the next biggest one. So we also need to consider the practicality, obviously. How do you regulate the guy who's in Soweto now, who says who's saying stuff that was instigating violence? We don't even know that person exists today. And then 5 years from now, there's going to be an AI podcast that is huge, and we don't know who's behind it. So how do we regulate that person in 5 years' time? So long story short, I think we do support self-regulation, but obviously with peer regulation that are also as significantly scaled as we are or close to, and then other industry regulatory bodies as well, I think is something we're more than happy to support.
That's great, and it's really encouraging to hear. I think that's exactly the kind of path we're wanting to carve here. And I think that if there's one thing you could be very sure of, is that other industry bodies and other self-regulatory systems that are already at play would be very supportive and would be ready to assist wherever they can. A lot of these self-regulatory bodies are in existence for like 3 decades. There's a lot that's learned there. And I think the point that Chris raised earlier was, who will subject themselves to these self-regulatory mechanisms, to these codes of conduct? Will they subject themselves to sanctions, to whatever? I mean, that's a different conversation. But I think just starting out and saying that we are very prepared to enter into something where there is an agreement is really, really positive. Whether you're going to be subscribing to a pledge, a code of conduct, whatever that might be, is a fantastic first step. So I think, the one wonderful thing out of today's conversation is that concrete thing, Chris, that is potentially going to be happening. And I think that's really good. And then, as I said, just to reach out to other self-regulatory entities, and just see some of the lessons learned from those along the way. Go ahead, Makato.
So when we engage with the guild, we encourage them to talk to the NAP, DCCSA, ISPA, and others, because of what you are saying, which is correct. And I think he made a point that I was looking at making, to say what we're seeing emerging, and maybe, I don't know, as part of your recommendations forward, because some of them you will be making to us, I cannot make them. So is to say how to differentiate between the larger podcasters and small ones. Because if we were to be honest, the larger ones are not South Africans. And I think I was interested to allow, if you can, the FPB to share with you the experience they had with Apple in relation to the country of origin. I think it's an issue that was raised, to say, how do you regulate podcasters that are coming from outside? To say what will be the best way of doing it. So, which is something you will need to consider. But I think the issues that are in front of us is to say, you will not deal like the ISPA thing. You will not deal with Spotify, Google, the same way you'll deal with the guy in Soweto, as he says. That there will need to be that differentiation. That's what we are seeing emerging in various other countries. And also to say, with the recommendations that were coming from the Competition Commission and the issue that we raised around Chapter 11 of the ECTA, because I think that's what has been holding, to say, what kind of responsibility do the platform owners have when the content that is illegal or whatever is flagged on their platform. But also, I think the issue that one was observing, which is very interesting to South Africa, I think in the morning we talked about I see pop-ups and others are talking about something called SAPS network. But the remote that we use to access those, I think if we were to look at it, the channels that are there, most of us will access Parliament, whatever, in terms of YouTube and whatever. And I think maybe in future the policy will have to differentiate between the platform owner and the people that are putting that content in, like you'll do with the ISPs, to say when something is loaded there, do you complain to the local ISP that is part of ISPA, or do you complain to the larger one that is where the platform is being? Because the person will receive it via the ISPA one to say, in terms of my service provider, I'm seeing this that I do not like. But I think what you have correctly said is that, like any other thing that was requiring regulation, this is new, and I think as it goes along, the approach of the French, the podcast, the audiovisual observatory, it's where everyone that is affected by the sector comes in and say what will work, and you balance all the interest that will be emerging from there. But what you do when you do the mapping study, you identify who's playing where, and then what are the issues. And I think it's the one that will address the who, why, where, and whatever in a way. But I think, as you say, it's a new thing, and then the engagement, I think, is welcome, so that we all hear, because no one will know everything around the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Odwa. I'm going to look at people who've been taking notes, because we need a few summary points to take forward. Odwa, go ahead, and then Chairperson Nabikasa.
Cool. First, I think, as Nadia has offered, that the NAB, if you need assistance, we've worked with the NAB and other bodies that are self-regulatory in this industry, and as the lawyers would also make ourselves available to assist in that regard. But perhaps this is a point I should have made at the beginning, but I think I can make it now. It's regarding the language that is, as the process unfolds, because it may not necessarily be how this is communicated, but how it is received at this point in time. It's the regulators against the podcasters, and that's how they receive it, and probably rightfully so. We'll need to build a language, that is inclusive, that suggests that we want to work together collaboratively, and for everyone to understand that a regulation process is to balance competing rights. In this case, Section 16, freedom of expression, any other competing rights, not to protect just society, also to protect the person, the subjects of the regulation, which are the podcasters. Yeah.
Important point. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I think from my side, Nad, I assume that we're thinking that in this country, our infrastructure is solid to support podcasters. Is that the assumption? Because we need to go back and say, whilst we recognize that podcasters or podcasting is a service, as South Africans, we're embracing it. But we need to make sure that the foundation, which is the infrastructure, connectivity, cost. So I think maybe going back to the committee, we may want to escalate the issue of, we summon ICASA as well, just to make sure that we understand the status of our infrastructure in South Africa. Then secondly is the issue of data storage, because I know that we've been talking about podcasts. I'm not sure how much of the content that is being stored in all the platforms that I've seen, it's in South Africa. Who's actually managing that content at the moment? So it's going to be important, as much as we embrace broadcast, it's actually the location of the content that is being stored somewhere, I don't know. So that's one. Then the third one, I think we spoke about education. I'm still worried that for podcasts, it appears to be more metropolitan. I think we need to understand what's the behavior currently. If I go to a place called Haskororo or Amlep or somewhere in Limpopo, and we don't have podcasters, I think from an association is to understand what's the fear of not having a podcast in a village. Is it because what we are trying to promote in this country, it might appear to be a new sector for the elite, So we need to find a way of changing the narrative. I'm saying this because emerging technologies and trends as a regulator, we need full inclusivity for everyone. Because and as and when we're saying that we're transforming South Africa, it must be everyone. So if somebody asks me tomorrow, Nadia, that yeah, you've been to Cape Town, what are you saying to me? I need to make sure that we give confidence that these new applications, new trends that we're talking about in Parliament, somebody in Lesiki is going to benefit. That would have been my closing remarks for now. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Lutivi. I think that's absolutely important. We need to understand there's not enough research, not enough data, not enough real understanding. I think that's a really good an important point. And I don't know who's busy doing the research around this particular type of digital content at the moment, if there are any universities or any independent agencies. But I think we need to know what we're talking about always. So thanks for that reminder. And the impact and the ability to influence an entire community and shape that community's thinking and outlook. Somebody mentioned there's somebody right now, perhaps, in whichever area, who might actually be inciting violence. We have no idea. Do we actually know? Do we know how many hundred podcasters there are, where they are located? Issue of metrics, issue of audience, we call it that, growth, issue of engagement. I mean, there's just so much that still needs to happen. And it goes down to the investment in the kind of research that we can get the data that can shape and inform ultimately what we're trying to develop here in terms of a framework. An enabling framework is what we have to constantly remind people of. This is about enabling tools and opportunities for continued innovation, economic growth, opportunities, especially for young people. So thanks, Audra, for that reminder as well, is how you shape this conversation and how it's not an us and them, it's not a regulator versus podcaster or digital content creator, but is how does this fit into the bigger economy, cultural development, heritage, etc. So I think it's so layered and so complex, and I think it's really timely that we are having this conversation. And we hope one of the recommendations would be for Parliament to consider that kind of additional layer of investment that needs to be put behind the kind of research outputs that we need in this field as well. Are there any final comments? Because we're going to have to quickly think about wrapping up. And you didn't say anything yet. We're waiting to hear what Meta and Grok has to say. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also curious about what Meta has to say as well. So I'll try and be quick. Look, on the subject of is podcasting for the elite? Absolutely not. Guys, there's more podcasts in each province than there are community radio stations. It's just they're specific to that area, right? There's a podcast on Venda who only does his podcast in Venda, and he does it incredibly well, and he's got a decent enough following. It's just that maybe they're just not popping up on your explore pages on TikTok or Instagram or whatever platforms you may be on, but they are there, and they are. There's a proliferation of these platforms that are coming out. So it's not a matter of people getting an opportunity to do it. They do it because they have this thing, which is a cell phone, and they can actually put something together, and then they somehow can get access to 5K to then start improving the quality of the platform. On the side of the recommendations that we're taking out, I just have one slightly, it's not really that radical, but it's somewhat radical. And it's that if we are saying that part of the discussion is around how do we somewhat put together some kind of regulatory framework around the platforms. I think that's all and well, but I think the other flip side that everybody agrees with is to say let's also nurture these platforms, and let's sort of make them grow. Digital media is not going anywhere, and one of the recommendations I would put in is something as radical as, if we've got digital media budgets, right, which are growing more and more for anyone who might be in corporate, then we put together a sense that at least spend 1% with a podcast. And that is where I think the other flip side of regulation comes in, to say that we have regulated to some degree. They are safe, but we also want to nurture this industry. And if you have a digital budget, spend at least 1% on podcasts so we can actually help nurture. And I'm not saying we should concentrate them in one specific platform, but let's do it across multiple platforms. If you want to speak to people in Limpopo, there's a podcaster in Limpopo who's doing very well. Spend some money with them. Let's help nurture these platforms and let's see them become real media juggernauts that I think they should become in the next 10 plus years. That's my one that's my one radical recommendation that I'd like you to put in.
That's great. You'd be surprised to know that's not radical at all, because I think Ayanda mentioned the point around content funds, digital content funds, and well, content funds for all content, regardless of whether it's digital in the good old analog space as well. That there needs to be real commitment and investment into content creation. And I think in the broadcasting space, for those of us who know this, for over a day, there's been this talk around allocating 30% of your budget to community media specifically. And I don't think that's going to be any different to allocating your budget specifically, to your point, to podcasting and other streams of content, because we're talking about it being in the bigger content sphere, the ecosystem of content. So great point. And I'm sure that people who are big marketers and advertisers for specific brands, hopefully, will also listen to that particular recommendation.
Yeah, 100%. And spending with the podcasters means with them directly, because what they do currently is they're spending a tremendous amount of money on the platforms, but they're spending above the content creators, meaning, no offense, they're going to Google, they're going to Meta, they're going to TikTok, right? But they're not spending their money with the people who are actually creating the content. So then that's why I made mention earlier that we could invite 10 of them, but maybe only one or two of them can afford a flight ticket to Cape Town if they're mostly in Joburg or whatever. So spend directly with them, not on top of them, because they're enjoying the benefits of spending on top of us, but within the platform is a whole different story.
So now he's going to have to speak.
I was listening, but I noted. Yeah, I'm not sure whether we're having this discussion too early or is it at the right time. As I said in the dancing game, if we're gonna now want to go back in the way that we're doing it in broadcasting, where you're saying we're regulating sports content, we're regulating news content, we're regulating movies and so on differently. On online platforms, it's not like that. It's about viewership there, who's viewing the content. It's about who this content is speaking to. But I think to really try to segregate them by having these discussions like this,
There's some tea and coffee if people want to grab some. Please feel free. I'm going to sit with Tawana and Tina. Are you leaving yet? About to leave. Okay. Just to pull together a few notes, and then we'll just report back here. And then if everybody's happy, then we'll be able to report back the bigger group. But good. Please grab some tea or coffee if you need some. And now that you all know how to use this, you can start your own podcast stream.